Imagine this. It's the year 850. You're standing on a wooden ship in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. No cabin, no heater, no walls to hide behind. Just an open deck, freezing wind slicing across your face, and waves crashing so cold they could stop your heart in minutes if you fell in. Now here's the part that should blow your mind. The people on that ship, they weren't suffering. They weren't shivering in misery, counting down the seconds until they died of hypothermia. Some of them were laughing. Some were sleeping soundly. Some were even sweating. Yeah, sweating. On a freezing ship in the middle of the ocean in the dead of winter. So how is that even possible? Stay till the end, because the last part of this story is going to completely change how you think about the Vikings, and honestly, how you think about the human body itself. Let's start with just how insane this situation really was. The North Atlantic isn't like your local lake or even a regular ocean crossing. The water temperature up there can sit just above freezing, cold enough that if a modern sailor with all our high-tech gear fell in today, they'd have about 10 to 15 minutes before their body completely shut down. Now picture doing that journey 1,000 years ago with wooden boats, wool clothes, and absolutely zero weather forecast telling you a storm was coming. The wind up there doesn't just feel cold, it cuts. It's the kind of cold that turns bare skin numb in minutes and can freeze a wet piece of clothing solid in under an hour. And Vikings weren't taking quick joyrides across this water. Some of their journeys lasted for days, sometimes weeks, sailing from Scandinavia toward places like Iceland, Greenland, and even the edge of North America. No stopping at a warm inn along the way, no emergency rescue helicopter, just open water, open sky, and whatever they packed onto that ship. So the obvious question is, how did they not just die? Here's where the story gets interesting, because the answer isn't one single trick. It's a whole system, a survival strategy built from clothing, body science, ship design, and something we don't talk about enough: raw human toughness. Let's start with the clothes, because this is where most people get it completely wrong. A lot of us picture Vikings in thin leather vests and horned helmets, basically dressed for a costume party, not a snowstorm at sea. That image is mostly Hollywood. Real Viking clothing was actually a masterclass in cold weather engineering, built from materials they understood better than most people today understand their own winter jackets. The base of it all was wool. Not just any wool, but wool worn in layers, and layering is the secret weapon here. Think of it like this. If you've ever gone skiing, you know the rule. One thick jacket is way worse than several thinner layers. That's because layers trap little pockets of warm air between them, like invisible blankets stacked on top of each other. Vikings figured this out with nothing but sheep and instinct. They'd wear an inner wool layer against the skin, then another wool layer on top, and finally an outer layer that could handle wind and water. And wool has this incredible property that most fabrics don't have. Even when it gets wet, it still keeps you warm. Cotton, when it's wet, turns into a cold, clingy nightmare that actually pulls heat away from your body. Wool, even soaked, still holds onto a good chunk of its insulating power. On a ship constantly getting splashed by freezing waves, that difference could be the line between life and death. On top of the wool, many Vikings added fur. Not fancy decorative fur like you'd see in a fashion show, but thick, practical animal hides. Sometimes bear, sometimes seal, sometimes reindeer. These weren't just warm, they were nearly windproof, blocking that brutal ocean gale from stripping away body heat. And here's a detail that surprises people. Some Vikings coated their outer clothing with natural oils and fats. Basically, a homemade version of waterproofing spray centuries before waterproof jackets existed. Now let's talk about the part of the body most people forget about, the feet and hands. Vikings often wore thick wool socks stuffed inside leather boots, and sometimes lined those boots with fur too. Frostbite on fingers and toes was one of the biggest threats on any freezing voyage, because those are the first parts of the body your blood vessels shut down to, in order to protect your core. So keeping the extremities insulated wasn't a luxury, it was survival math. But here's where the story takes a turn that most people never expect. Clothing alone couldn't have kept them alive on some of those brutal multi-day crossings. There's something else going on, something inside their own bodies. Human beings, when exposed to consistent cold over and over across a lifetime, actually start to adapt. Not instantly, but gradually. This is where we get into something scientists call cold acclimatization. Basically, your body's ability to get better at handling cold the more it experiences it. Vikings weren't stepping onto that ship as soft, cushy, climate-controlled humans like a lot of us are today. They grew up in cold Scandinavian villages, worked outside in harsh winters from childhood, and their bodies were essentially trained, almost like an athlete training for a marathon, except this training was for surviving brutal temperatures. Studies on modern populations who live in extreme cold, like certain fishing and diving communities, show something wild. Their bodies can adjust blood flow more efficiently, keeping core organs warm while sacrificing a little bit of heat to the skin's surface. Some research even shows people who are regularly exposed to cold can generate slightly more internal heat through a process involving something called brown fat, a special type of fat that literally burns energy to produce warmth rather than just storing it. It's like having a built-in heater inside your body that most modern humans barely use, because we live in heated houses and heated cars and heated everything. So when we say some Vikings might have actually felt warm, even sweaty, in freezing conditions, this is why. Their bodies weren't just wrapped in wool. Their bodies were wired differently, shaped by a lifetime of exposure most of us can't even imagine. Now let's step onto the ship itself, because the ship wasn't just a boat. It was basically a floating survival machine, designed with warmth and endurance in mind, even if it doesn't look that way at first glance. Viking ships, the famous longships, were built low and open, which actually sounds like the worst possible design for staying warm. No walls, no roof, just an open deck exposed to wind and spray. But here's the twist. That open design actually helped the crew work together as a unit, and teamwork turns out to be one of the most underrated survival tools of all. Picture dozens of men packed closely together on that ship, rowing in rhythm, sharing body heat just by proximity. Human bodies radiate heat, and when you cram people shoulder to shoulder in a tight wooden vessel, that heat doesn't just disappear into the wind, it builds up around the group like a slow, steady furnace. Add in the physical labor of constant rowing, and you've got another heat source. Because intense physical activity is one of the fastest ways the human body generates warmth. Vikings weren't sitting still on that freezing ship. They were working hard, muscles burning, blood pumping, bodies literally creating their own internal fire through movement. At night, or during rest periods, crews would often huddle beneath animal hide coverings or sleeping sacks made from thick fur and wool, sometimes sharing these coverings between 2 or 3 people at once. Again, shared body heat. It's the same principle survival experts teach today. If you're stranded in the cold with another person, huddling together can be the difference between life and death, because you're literally pooling your body's furnace power. And here's something that really surprises people. Vikings often carried small portable fire sources, sometimes using fire pits lined with stone or sand placed carefully on the ship to avoid burning the wood, especially during longer voyages or when anchored near shore. Fire on a wooden boat sounds like an insane risk, and it was, but the reward was worth it. A small contained fire wasn't just for warmth, it was for cooking, for drying wet clothing, for morale. Imagine being soaked, freezing, exhausted, and then finally getting 5 minutes near a small flame, drying your wool socks, warming your hands. That tiny moment of comfort could reset your body just enough to survive another day. Diet played a role too, and this is a detail people rarely think about. Vikings ate incredibly calorie-dense foods on these voyages, things like dried fish, salted meat, and fatty foods that burn slowly and produce steady heat as the body digests them. Eating fat and protein in cold environments isn't just about hunger, it's fuel for your internal furnace. Your body burns energy to digest food, and fattier foods burn hotter and longer, kind of like throwing a thick log onto a fire instead of a thin twig that burns out in seconds. So when you put it all together, the layered wool clothing trapping warm air, the waterproof fur and oils blocking wind and water, the years of childhood cold exposure training their bodies to adapt, the physical labor of rowing generating internal heat, the huddled body warmth of dozens of crewmates, the occasional contained fire for drying and comfort, and the calorie-dense fatty diet fueling their internal engine. You start to see it. Surviving a freezing ocean voyage wasn't about one clever trick. It was an entire lifestyle built around understanding cold better than almost anyone alive today. And this is where it gets even wilder, because think about what this actually tells us. These weren't superhuman warriors with magical resistance to cold. They were regular people, farmers, traders, families, who through knowledge passed down generation after generation, and through bodies shaped by their environment, turned one of the most hostile places on Earth into something survivable, sometimes even manageable. Compare that to us today. Most of us panic if the thermostat drops a few degrees. We complain about a cold morning walking from our car to a building. Meanwhile, there were people 1,000 years ago who crossed entire oceans in open wooden boats, in temperatures that would kill most modern humans in under an hour, and they did it again and again. Not as some rare miracle, but as a normal part of life. And that's really the powerful part of this whole story. The Vikings weren't special because they had some secret superpower. They were special because they paid attention. They understood their environment. They understood their materials. They understood their own bodies. And they built a system, piece by piece, generation after generation, that let them do the impossible. It makes you wonder what modern humans have lost by making everything so comfortable. We've got heated seats and instant warmth at the push of a button. But somewhere along the way, we lost a lot of that deep, practical understanding of survival that used to be passed down through every family, every village, every generation. The Vikings didn't have technology. They had knowledge, adaptation, and community. And honestly, that turned out to be just as powerful. So the next time you complain about a cold winter morning, just remember there were people who sailed straight into the freezing unknown, across brutal oceans, with nothing but wool, fire, fat, and each other, and they didn't just survive it. Sometimes they thrived in it. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Human beings are far tougher, far more adaptable than we usually give ourselves credit for. We just don't get tested the way the Vikings were anymore. If this blew your mind, imagine what else ancient humans figured out that we've completely forgotten today.